Welcome to a Shot in the Arm podcast. I'm Ben Plumley, and this is the podcast about innovation and equity in global health. And this week, we are coming at you from Munich, Germany, for the 25th World Conference on AIDS, AIDS 2024. And I am delighted to be joined by my two co-hosts, the invincible Yvette Raphael. Hi there, Yvette.
Hi, Ben.
And new to the stable of Shot in the Arm podcast hosts, it's Jeff Sturchio. Hey, Jeff.
Hello.
Well, look at the energy in this room. We haven't even started the conference, and we're exhausted. It's Monday. The opening is taking place, I guess, as we're recording this. And I guess what we're going to do is just touch base on what we've been doing for the last couple of days and what we're hoping for in the week. So, Yvette, you got here at the start of the weekend. You've been run off your feet. What have you been up to?
Yes, it's my fourth day in München. Please don't say Munich. Yes, I've been attending some sessions, the Global Village opening, as well as the CLM pre-conference.
Wait, CLM.
Community-led monitoring pre-conference, as well as the K-POPs pre-conference. And there was the people living with HIV, the living pre-conference that happens at every conference. So it was exciting. And today I had two sessions, very draining, but I'm alive.
Oh, great. Well, we'll come back to those. But I guess equally exhausting, Jeff. What have you been up to? You've been braving the press conferences for us.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience to see allegedly how news is being made, but it's been good. It's been illuminating in some ways. I've been to both the UNAIDS press briefing on the new UNAIDS report. I'll say a few words about that. Went to the science briefing, the top papers, which was held last week, in fact, as a curtain raiser. I'll talk about that, too, in a little bit more detail. And then I just came from the opening press briefing, which was chaired by Sharon Lewin, the president of IAS and co-chair of AIDS 2024, and had an intriguing lineup of speakers. John Nkengasong, the head of PEPFAR, Jay Malucha, who's a trans man from Uganda, and was the first time that a trans person had been involved in an opening briefing and in the opening ceremony, which I understand he'll be involved in as well. Chris Collins, the CEO of Friends of the Global Fight, Winnie Byanyima from UNAIDS, and Andrei Klepikov from Ukraine.
Plenty of friends of the pod on the opening press conference. So, well, Jeff, what's been hot? What has really stood out to you? Maybe start with the UNAIDS press conference, because we were sort of quite interested in knowing what the global report was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I'm not sure I understand exactly what's in the global report from the press briefing, but let me come back to that in a minute, because Sharon Lewin was moderating it, and she actually not moderating it. I take that back. She was one of the speakers, and one of the things that she said was to talk about the theme of this conference, which is putting people first. And the way she stated it was that you won't get to the end of HIV without people at the center. So I think that's certainly an important ambition, an important statement of principle. I wonder if that's actually going to be the case at the rest of the conference. So we might talk about that.
Well, yes, I bet you've got a few things to say about that, Yvette.
Yes, definitely. Putting people first means putting everybody first. Black, brown, women bodies, people from Africa. And talking about that, putting people first was to ensure that people who need to be at this conference are here. We have so many visas denied. And when you look at whose visas were denied, it's young, key populations, Black children who have a story to tell, who has to come here and be part of that conference. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about putting people first, I think we really need to put action to it. This morning, I went to the opening of the sex workers, their Global Village stand, and one thing that Dr. Tlaleng from South Africa said is putting people first means putting sex workers in their entirety first, not only just for criminalization, decriminalization, but this is a whole person, somebody who has a family, who has children. So when we say putting people first, I agree with you. How do we put that to the test and understand what that really means? If people's visas are denied, if sex workers are not here, if K-pops from Africa are not here, if young people are not here.
Well, Sharon Lewin is an incredibly passionate activist and physician from Australia. But I got to confess, I can't help rolling my eyes, putting people first. We always do this at conferences. We always pick places where it is next to impossible for populations who are really at the forefront, who we say have to be at the cutting edge of the response, and we don't let them come.
Yes, but I want to agree that it's difficult for these organizers to choose between countries. But also, if we don't come to countries that block certain populations, we are not doing them any favor. They are going to live on some island. What we can do is now highlight their BS.
Thank you for that, Yvette. And we won't cut that out, because every time we do podcasts, we get that explicit noting on Spotify, which is fabulous. But let's go back to the UNAIDS report. Jeff,
Sure.
You said you didn't know what it was they were reporting.
Well, for instance, the executive director of UNAIDS said very little about any of the statistics that are in the report, which is one of the most important things from this report every year, because it really gives a snapshot of what progress has been made and where there are still gaps that need to be addressed. So, and, I suppose you could say they just didn't have enough time to go into all of this. But last week at the pre-conference press briefing on some of the key science that's coming out, one of Winnie Byanyuma's people from UNAIDS did talk about those numbers. And what they've done in that abstract, which was presented by Eric Lamontagne from UNAIDS, what he did was show that they had done an analysis of what will the indicators on the global HIV response look like in 2050 if we continue on the current path, versus what will happen if we actually take the actions that need to be taken.
Whoa, 2050?
Yeah, 2050.
We're talking 2050 now. Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, well, and so what he pointed out was that on the current trend, if the political actions that need to be taken, that Winnie was talking about, which I'll come back to, if those aren't taken, we're likely to see, I think it's 35 million more new infections and close to 18 million new deaths or avoidable deaths from HIV/AIDS related infections by 2050. And remember, just to sort of keep the numbers in mind, right now there are about 40 million people living with HIV. About 30 million of those people are now on treatment. And we're still seeing something like over 600,000 deaths a year. So between now and 2050, another 17.5 million deaths is not trivial. And so that was one of the things that he focused on. And also he pointed out that it will cost something on the order of $10,300 per person for countries if they don't take these actions now. So between now and 2050, the cumulative cost times those 17.5 million new infections will cost, actually, all the people living with HIV will cost a significant amount of money. So one of Winnie Byanyuma's messages was the costs of inaction are exponentially greater than the costs of action. So I think that's an important point. But countries, donors in particular, seem to be able to ignore that without worrying about it. I mean, they just aren't putting in the money that's needed, because she also pointed out that there's about a $9.5 billion gap each year in the money that's required to actually fund fully the interventions that are required so that everybody can get access to treatment and prevention tools and care, and what's actually being done.
Because it's not just financial resources. Here we are in 2024, and it's political human rights resources. And the very people who are hardly reached that we need to get these services to are precisely those who are being increasingly persecuted. And it just... one other question from the report. Did UNAIDS talk about how many new infections there continue to be? And I asked that question because it has remained stubbornly constant for the last decade.
Yeah, well, and it's worse than that. I mean, in aggregate, it's been stubbornly constant in terms of new infections per year. But one of the key themes of this new report, and they do have the data to demonstrate it, is that in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, in Middle East, North Africa, and in Latin America, new infections are actually increasing. They're going in the wrong direction. So, and that, in fact, then just to jump across to the opening press briefing where Andrei Klepikov spoke, he pointed out, I mean, first of all, the heroic work they're doing in Ukraine.
Now, just remind us, Andrei is the executive director for the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine.
That's right, yeah. So he's been doing a lot to lead the response in Ukraine throughout this war. And he was also talking, though, about other countries in the region, particularly Russia. So one of the points he made, which I thought was very powerful, was that in addition to the war in Ukraine, Russia also has a war on evidence-based science when it comes to HIV prevention and treatment. For instance, despite all the drug addiction in Russia, they won't allow any kind of alternate, of treatments, methadone or with naloxone and other sorts of medically assisted treatments to help people deal with drug addiction. They don't acknowledge that trans people exist. So obviously they're not providing care and treatment for trans people who are at risk of or living with HIV. He just went down a whole list of really crazy and pernicious public policies in Russia that make it impossible for people to deal adequately with the AIDS epidemic.
It reminds me of an article that a British security expert who is a real expert on Russia, Mark Galeotti, wrote, noting that India, in maintaining this neutral role between the West and Russia, had actually found additional new markets for its HIV medications in Russia, particularly to pay for pre-exposure prophylaxis. And that's certainly something we'll come back to in future episodes. But it does just go to show what a curious state of affairs we are living in. Yvette, you are here partly to promote the choice agenda. And I wonder if you could just summarize what that is. And of course, it ties in absolutely with what Jeff was just talking about in terms of prevention.
Yes, and also somebody needs to bring these modelers together so that they can say the same thing. There are so many people at this conference and everybody's picking up this and that. And one of the things that a friend of mine picked up was that, Yvette, we're going to live up to 70. So that is a good thing, right? But coming back to the Choice Manifesto is exactly that we are in a space, a very pivotal point. So many new prevention options are becoming available, are proving to have worked, but how many of those are available in the countries where we really need these methods to make it available to bring down the new infections? So the Choice Manifesto, not the agenda, we work together with the CASPER program, and what we do there is, with the Choice Manifesto, we demand that every product that becomes available, proves to work, becomes available in our communities, and that communities must choose. The big problem here is that once a product, and our governments are guilty of this, once a product is approved, everybody's praising it. Like lenacapavir, at the moment, we stand risk of our governments thinking that, I can only buy 2 injections instead of 6 or over the year's time. But what we are saying is that people change what they want to use. Somebody might want something long-acting for 6 months today, but tomorrow they might want something shorter, as well as taking PrEP for something. People, their opportunity, their situations change every day, and that is what the Choice Manifesto is on about. But most importantly is that we as women of Africa, who is the African Women's Prevention Community Accountability Board, are holding accountable not only governments but also policymakers and product developers to say, once you make this available, once you've gotten the results you want from our communities, please ensure that this becomes available and work with us for that, because we don't just need one prevention options. Our needs change as we go.
And there was an observation you made, Jeff, this morning from one of the sessions you'd been in around the demands or the pleas from some of the women who've participated in trials to have access. What was that?
Yesterday I was just wandering around the global village to see what was going on, because just a brief aside, I'm always impressed by the difference in the vibe between the main conference area and the global village at each of these international AIDS conferences. One is quiet and sort of boring, and there are lots of people in little groups having serious conversations, and lots of sessions where there are always too many speakers, never enough time for discussion. Mm-hmm. In the global village, in another part of the Congress Center, you've got people milling around, excited, shouting at each other, it's full of life. There's this incredibly excited vibe, and you just think, this is where things are really getting done. So I happened to just sit in on a conversation that Casper was.
And remind us what CASPER stands for.
It's the Coalition for Accelerating Support and Prevention Research, and Supporting Prevention Research.
Yes.
And it's
APA is a part of.
Yeah.
And APA is?
Advocates for the Prevention of HIV in Africa. Ben, you must get used to this, that we speak in acronyms.
I know.
That is why the Global Village is much more fun. I think we break it down there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. As do we. I think my sole job is to ask us to break down the epidemic of acronyms. But anyway, this conversation.
So this conversation was a group of largely young African women. It was facilitated by some of the coordinators from CASPER, and it started slow. The facilitators were doing all the talking, and then they kept asking questions, and then finally, people started to get into the spirit of things, and so they were sharing information. And one of the women from Zambia made an important point, I think, that African women are fatigued by prevention research trials. Because, they go to all the trouble to enroll in the trial, they go for all these clinic visits, they follow the protocol, and then when the study's over, they never find out what happens with the compound, and it can be 10 years before it actually shows up in their country, by which time many of those women may have become HIV infected and may die because they didn't get the right treatment. So I thought that was an important point, and she went on to say that, look, if developers and donors and multilateral organizations are going to invest in new commodities, they also have to invest in the communities that are going to use those commodities. So I thought that was really important. And then obviously other people piled on because they had their own experiences to add to that. But that gets back to the comment I made earlier in our conversation that there's lots of lip service to putting people at the center, but the questions that arose in that global village discussion around lenacapavir and cabotegravir and the new, long-acting injectables are the critical questions that will make a difference in whether those tools actually are used to really prevent more infections among more people. But they have to be developed in a way that take the lived experience of people in the community into account.
But what you're saying is that conversation needed to be at the main stage.
Yes.
But unfortunately, again, some of the young people cannot afford to pay to get into the main conference, and they can only go into the global village where it's free of access, which we appreciate. But also, we are losing on some of the very key, important contributions by women of Africa and young women.
So let's turn to the science. Let's turn to the things that are interesting and kind of got our eye this week. And let me kick off. I had the dubious pleasure of moderating a panel today, and actually, I got to say, to the organizers, it was a stroke of genius. Finally, we get a session on diagnostics right at the start in a primetime session rather than, the 7 o'clock graveyard slot of a Thursday morning. And I think there is exceptional enthusiasm about multi-test platforms. So the idea that you could test for HIV, for the viral hepatitis, for HPV, human papillomavirus, all in one go, and that you could do this rapidly and start getting this to physicians and the patients that they serve. But also this sense that, the broader AIDS movement just isn't focused on diagnostics. And, I think we all had a call to action at the end of it to say, well, look, we all think this is important. We all, whether we're from Mozambique, Kenya, American CDC, we need to be advocates for diagnostics in every session. So I got a bit of a kick out of that. But Yvette, what are you looking for this week? What's standing out for you?
I'm looking forward to hearing more from Gilead around lenacapavir. I know they're going to release their session, and to just hear how they're going to ensure that communities continue to get this commodity after the results. And for me, that is important. Also, how long will it take for it to become available, not only in Africa, but in the rest of the world? It's important that when these commodities are found to work and safe, that we really follow a clear pathway on how to get it in the hands of those who need it.
And this is what I love about Shot in the Arm podcast, because we put access first.
Yes.
Jeff, do you want to explain to us what lenacapavir is and what the science is that we're expecting to see this week?
Well, sure. The presentation that Yvette was referring to is one that Linda Gail Becker from South Africa will make. She's one of the principal investigators on the Purpose 1 trial, which was a trial of lenacapavir, which is a capsid inhibitor that's used as an injectable every 6 months. And so the trial looked at a cohort of cisgender African women to see if this was effective as a prevention tool for HIV infection. The preliminary results were released a few weeks ago, and they showed that there were 0 cases of HIV infection in the treatment arm. So that is pretty exciting, and that's why there's so much buzz about this study. Now, on the question that Yvette raised about, how will this now become available to people? And, this is just the start of what's going to be still a very long process, because that's just the first of their phase 3 pivotal trials. There's another pivotal trial now, which is going to be in cisgender men who have sex with men, in trans people, and a couple of other subpopulations, which I don't recall the details right now, but that phase 3 trial is probably is fully enrolled, but we won't have results from it before early next year. And that means that the earliest that Gilead is likely to be able to file for registration in a stringent regulatory authority is going to be sometime next year, rather than, which means the earliest that we'll see the market introduction of lenacapavir is likely to be a year from then. So it's probably
as PrEP, but it is licensed in the US for treatment.
Yes.
And the other thing to say is it's another of these long-acting injectables.
Right. Like cabotegravir.
Yeah.
But I was referring to lenacapavir as PrEP, since those are the results that'll be discussed this week. That means that the earliest that Gilead is likely to introduce it in a market is early 2026. So that's about 18 to 24 months from now, depending on exactly when it is. And then, depending on their strategy for generic licensing, it would probably be another year before any generic versions are available. We can come back to that. So there's plenty of excitement about this trial, and I think it's going to be one of the threads that runs through the entire week, because the fact that there were 0 infections in the treatment arm in the Purpose 1 trial just really captured everyone's attention. Now, of course, there's going to be a challenge in managing expectations, because one of the other things that I heard at the Global Village yesterday was that there are already people in the community thinking that this is now the end of AIDS, that all we have to do is make sure everybody takes lenacapavir for PrEP and we're done. But of course, as you alluded to, Yvette, it's not that simple.
Yeah, definitely. It's never that simple, because right now with this zero scenario of zero infections, what we are going to be faced with is people are going to start asking questions. Is the other commodities just as effective, or why is it? And it creates that inferiority thing that we don't want to see. What's important for us is, when is it going to become available? Yeah.
Yeah, and also one of the other papers that was in the early science briefing that I listened to early last week, that Sharon Lewin moderated, was the SEARCH trial from Kenya, and I'm sure you're familiar with the SEARCH trial, which is in a group of both women and men in rural Uganda and in Kenya, in which they were studying CAB-LA, that is cabotegravir long-acting injectable, for PrEP, as part of a dynamic choice study. That is looking at whether people would choose oral PrEP, CAB-LA, or CAB PEP, that is post-exposure prophylaxis. And they were trying to gather real-world evidence about how people would actually respond to these different choices. What was interesting there is that they found that 71% of the women and 72% of the men chose CAB-LA when they were given a choice about prevention modalities. That new infections in this trial were reduced to 0 versus standard of care as well. And that 64%, so 3 out of 5 people who chose CAB-LA, said it was easier to take an injection or take a series of injections, because they didn't have to worry about remembering pills and other stuff. So that that kind of makes the situation the picture even more complex, because here we have CAB-LA in the real world having 0 infections, and everybody's excited about, and apparently lenacapavir can show in the early results from the Purpose 1 trial that there will be 0 infections. So they're now, if those results are confirmed in other trials, then it really is a question of just now answering the questions: who is actually going to get access, and when will they get access? This comes back to, and I just want to, one of the things that Winnie Byanyima said in her presentation at the UNAIDS briefing with the new UNAIDS report was, of course, one of the major focus of what needs to be done now is to make sure that the treatment and prevention options that we now have, there are so many of them and so many good ones, really need to be made available to everybody everywhere who can benefit. Definitely. So she didn't ignore that question. But making things available to everyone everywhere is not a simple matter, and that's the kind of work that you and your colleagues are always bringing people's attention back to. And also, it's not just the governments and the clinicians in countries where most people who live with AIDS or live with HIV or who are at risk of getting HIV infection. It's not just those people who have responsibilities for this, but product developers, donors, multilateral organizations. Right. Everybody needs to start working together to listen to communities about what they need and what actually works, so that we can start to actually allocate resources in a way that will get us closer to making sure that everybody who needs treatment or prevention can get access.
Because I mean, you said this is your 15th AIDS conference. I don't know how many I've been to, and I guess I'm feeling a bit long in the tooth. But how many times have we had the silver bullet being presented, whether it's single-dose nevirapine for all pregnant women across Africa to prevent mother-to-child transmission? And when push comes to shove, when it comes to action on the ground, to reality, it's never that simple. And I do wonder if we're falling into that usual mistake that we do at AIDS conferences. And Yvette, I mean, so you've been a passionate champion of the dapivirine ring, the microbicide. And when you hear the enthusiasm for long-acting, at conferences like this. What does that make you feel as it relates to an important prevention modality that's about choice for women?
For us, when it comes to choice, it's always what we have and what is available. And currently, we know that we have a lot of rings that are available that somebody needs to buy. And we had the announcement yesterday by Global Fund that they're going to buy 120,000 rings for Africa. And that is an important announcement. We also heard that the PEPFAR is donating some shots for South Africa specifically, and that works for us because we want all of these modalities available. But when you hear magic bullets, I know it translates to trouble. Our governments will run and think that is the magic bullet. But right now, the only consolation for us is that price is deterring them from making it a magic bullet. And we demand for the prices to come down, but also there is no magic bullet because women's needs change all the time.
Mm. Well, let's move on. One other piece I really wanted to get both of your thoughts on is something called, and here we go with the AIDS acronyms again, DoxyPEP. And there are 2 studies being released this week looking at the role of an antibiotic, doxycycline, for use in pre-exposure prophylaxis, but also post-exposure prophylaxis, PEP, particularly in men who have sex with men, as a way of preventing STIs like syphilis, like gonorrhea. And WHO yesterday had a major session on the science, but also the implementation, because of course at this point WHO has not yet included DoxyPEP in its recommendations. And there is quite a debate going on amongst the public health community about how and whether this intervention should be prioritized. The big concern is that widespread use of doxy could speed up microbial
resistance.
Thank you, Jeff. So there's a real conversation, putting it politely, about what to do with this.
My thoughts exactly, Ben, is that when we talk about pre-exposure and post-exposure prophylaxis as a solution, we should allow communities to make that decision. We always preempt to say our communities will get resistance, they will not know how to use it. And what we do in turn is actually block the way for something that somebody can take real quick and real fast without any hindrance. I say PEP is something we've been sleeping on for a long time. We could have had all of this evidence if we cared enough about PEP for DoxyPEP if we actually did not sleep on PEP.
Well, they did. Some of the studies that are being presented this week are on DoxyPrep rather than PEP.
Wow.
But and 2 of them were presented in this IAS press briefing last week as some of the interesting science that's coming out of the meeting. One is a study that was done by a group in Vancouver and Toronto of 52 men who have sex with men, and they were given 100 milligrams daily of doxycycline for prevention of STIs, and then there was a placebo arm as well. And what they found was that 79% of them completed the protocol, which was pretty good. The tolerability and side effects were okay. There weren't a lot of side effects, and so people found it tolerable. And they found an 80% reduction in STIs, and that varied. For syphilis, it was down 79%, gonorrhea was down 68%, and chlamydia was down 92%. And they actually looked for additional resistance to doxy, and they found that it wasn't significant. So, but this is just one study in 52 MSMs. There was also a study presented from Tokyo in which 40 female sex workers were given the choice of doxyprep, same dosage. They looked at 5 STIs, and they found there was a 66% reduction in STIs among the women who used doxyprep. And there was also a 36% increase in testing for STIs as a result. So those were the preliminary results from those 2 studies. But again, one of the things that people always have to keep in mind is these were studies of 40 women in one case and 52 men in another. And these are just preliminary, studies that provide some indications of what may happen if you study this in larger populations in different cohorts. So that's an important caveat. But those were some of the science that will be discussed further this week.
Well, I guess we're getting up to the top of the hour, and I guess we're all rushing off to our next events. I'm going to the MTV Staying Alive Foundation reception.
With me.
With you, Yvette, and
Yes.
both of us as
So that I
board
don't
members,
get lost.
so you don't get
like
lost.
I've been doing at all the conferences.
Well, I understand you've been using public transport fairly
Yes,
extensively.
I've upgraded.
I'm impressed. What are you up to tonight, Jeff?
Well, I think I'm going to get ready for some of our other podcasts this week. So, this doesn't happen by magic. But I want to just leave you with one other comment that came out of the UNAIDS press briefing. And that was from Archbishop Thabo Makgoba from South Africa. And he was just terrific in the intervention that he made. It was by video. He wasn't actually here in person. But he said we have to remember that as human beings, we're all interdependent. We cannot end AIDS for some places, for some people. We can only end AIDS if we do so for everyone, everywhere.
Yes.
And I thought that was a very eloquent and important statement.
Very important statement. And as we were talking about Ukraine, Palestine matters. The same as Ukraine.
Well, and for the fight against HIV, it's everyone, everywhere.
Yes.
Now, before we close, and this will really only be noticeable, I guess, to people who are enjoying this podcast visually, Jeff has the most incredible set of papers that put both Yvette and I to shame. Notebooks, briefing documents. I got to say, I'm really impressed, Jeff.
Well, I find you have to be organized to really take advantage of a conference like this.
Yeah, but Jeff's saying I'm disorganized.
No. We all have our own ways of coping with information overload.
And that's what we're going to try and do this week, is to make sure that we minimize the information overload by bringing you the latest and the most important information that comes out of the conference. So that's it for this episode. Thank you very much to my co-hosts, Yvette Raphael and Jeff Sturchio. We'll be back at you tomorrow. Have a great day and a safe day, everybody.